All right, so it is 1 minute past the hour. I wanted to go ahead and get started and welcome you all to our webinar on the impact of RFPs on marketing and business development and the pursuit of winning more business. My name is Jason Noble. I am co-founder and chief of product strategy for ikaun, where I lead both our research and development and our product development for our AI-powered knowledge management and experience management platform. ikaun primarily focuses on automating the mundane tasks that you all probably go through when you're researching work and when you're creating pitches, proposals, and responding to RFPs. With me, I have an amazing panel, very, very talented group of people, thought leaders, and I wanted to go ahead and give the panel the opportunity to introduce themselves, starting with Rachel.
Hello, I'm Rachel Shields-Williams. I'm a Director of Knowledge Management here at Sidley Austin. Sidley is an AmLaw top 10 firm with 2,300 lawyers and 21 offices across the globe. And I oversee our experience and insights and data enablement groups for KM.
Jason?
Hi, folks. I'm the other Jason Kennedy, Operational Excellence Consultant with Calibrate. We're a trusted executive search and organizational consultancy focused on helping law firms achieve operational excellence, optimizing your talent, process, and performance. I think we're going to drop a URL in the chat, but if not, you need to find me. You can do so at calibrate-strategies.com.
Murray?
Hi, Murray Joslin from Integreon. Great to be with everyone today. Integreon is a global outsourcing managed services firm focused on largely the supporting law firms and legal practices with both document services as well as creative services, which we'll talk about today. Our ability to help deliver large scale and small scale pitches, and look forward to our conversation today.
Perfect. All right. So in terms of the webinar itself, just wanted to give you an agenda of what we'll talk about today. So first and foremost, we will review some of the key findings of the report itself, just some of the high level aspects of it. And then we're going to open it up for a panel discussion. And really, we're going to focus on strategies for winning more. I think what came out of the RFP survey is that's clearly what you all are asking for is to increase your win percent when doing RFPs, pitches, and proposals. And if you're interested in downloading the report, I think hopefully the majority of you have done so. But if you scan this QR code, it will take you to a screen where you can download the RFP report. And really what we're trying to do from an objective perspective is during the panel is just give you all a couple actionable ideas that you can take away and immediately work on for not only increasing your win rate, but also even when you're submitting, ensuring that the quality of each one of your responses is such that you differentiate yourself and you actually position yourself for future work and future opportunities. So let's go ahead and go through some of the key findings. Within our survey, basically what we did is we laid it out where we asked, I think it was about 13 questions, and it was really focused on how many RFPs do you do each year? How much time do you spend on those? And one of the things that we found, and this is an average, we found that on average an RFP takes about 46 hours to respond to, and those are work hours. Now, the time varied significantly. So there were some that were as few as 10 hours, but many that were in the high end. Some were even like 320 hours. So pretty significant project, if you will, responding to one of these RFPs. Then what we did is we actually calculated the annual cost of doing a certain number of RFPs per year. And what we found is that while marketing and BD actually performed the majority of the work, it was actually the pull on the fee earners that actually impacted that most dramatically impacted the financial aspect of responding to these RFPs. So I think one of the lessons learned here is obviously the less that we pull on fee earners to complete these RFPs and these pitches and proposals, the more cost effective it is. The other aspect was that the average win rate was about 18%. Not bad. I think that's obviously you want to increase that, but this is really what we're going to focus on because, again, more the research found that this is what you're looking to improve on the most is increasing that win rate. We all want to win more business, be more efficient and effective in the time that we're spending. And so increasing this win rate is really one of your primary objectives. Some other things to note that we found is that as it relates to the time that you all are spending, a lot of the time you're spending is actually answering questions that you've asked or answered within past RFPs or pitches or proposals. So you're spending a lot of time looking through your past responses because you know that you answered this question for this particular RFP, and so you're kind of digging through your past RFPs. The one challenge that came to light was that if you're on a team where multiple people are responding to these RFPs, taking advantage or even having an understanding as to whether or not someone else answered a question on your RFP is very, very challenging. So sometimes you went back to email and said, hey, has anybody answered this particular question from one of their past responses? And then that kind of email chaos kind of kicks in. But you also found, or we're spending a lot of time researching relevant work, making sure that what you include in the response is the most relevant work, and then also identified qualified bench. So a lot of the times clients will want to know what your bench looks like in terms of total qualified individuals that can do this type of work. And so we found that you were spending a lot of time researching into which people to include. And then, of course, everyone was spending a significant amount of time reading your past RFPs, reading your past proposals, and again, digging into those past documents. Now, one thing that I do want to do, and I meant to do this just a little bit earlier, was actually do a poll, because one of our questions was asked actually, what tools and utilities do you use to respond to these RFPs? And so I want to go ahead and kick it over to Dylan for about 45 seconds. He's going to launch a poll where we can discuss some of the tools and technologies that you all are using.
Hi, everyone.
Jason. Go ahead, Dylan. Sorry.
I was going to say there should be a poll on your screen. If you could just give that an answer, and we'll resume in about 30 seconds.
Jason, I want to put you on the spot. We had a good question come in the chat about how people responded to the time tracking bits in the survey.
Mm-hmm.
Was that actual, or are they tracking hours, or was that a estimate?
Okay, yeah, so these are estimates. So one of the questions within the survey was, do you track your time? And I think literally one firm said that they do, meaning, do you track the time you spend responding to RFPs? So they were kind of broad ranges, 10 to 20, 20 to 40. So it was and actually I think we had a slider on it where people could specify their average response time. But we did ask that question of, do you actually track your time? And the overwhelming majority was that they don't have a time tracking aspect to these RFPs responses.
And I could piggyback on that and say we worked with clients in the past that have used, even for a short period of time, usually 4 to 6 weeks, they've introduced some sort of SaaS time tracking tool or some existing internal time tracking tool. So if you wanted to get a sense of like, how much are we spending time-wise, resource-wise on RFPs, pursuits, et cetera, there's a means-tested way to do that. So you've got that option if you want to get that deep as far as analysis goes.
And I'll piggyback on that as someone who's participated in 3 of them in my career here at Sidley. They really are very powerful tools to understanding, are you doing the right work at the right time for the right stakeholders in order to drive revenue at your organization. So if you're thinking about it, highly, highly encourage giving it a go with your department for a brief period of time.
Yeah, a lot of these RFPs, I mean, they really are projects, right? Depending upon the size. Getting organized is super important, making sure that people know their roles and responsibilities, whether it's researching representative work or figuring out who we should position on a particular matter. looking up past work that we've done. So they really are projects, and treating them as such is pretty important. So Dylan, did we have some responses, some
Yep,
numbers?
so just closing the poll now and sharing the results, kind of see how we laid out. 3% said RFP automation software. 35% was the majority of the answers to this proposal software, proposal automation software. 20% experience / expertise management software. 16% Excel. 3% SharePoint and ChatGPT, and 6% Outlook / pardon the interruption emails, and then 13% was other.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I think on the Chat GPT side, I know, Rachel, you had some insights on that with Beautiful AI and Chat GPT.
Yeah. I wasn't surprised to see it at such a low percentage. These tools are really great at ideation and generative thought, and they're helpful, but we have to be really conscientious of how we use them within our firms and our departments. And if you're toying with the idea, because Beautiful AI, as someone who's awful at PowerPoint, is a very attractive option for me. Definitely make sure that you talk with your OGC and you're following your firm's privacy rules, because different products expose different information. So just make sure that you're an informed consumer and you're following your firm's best practices when it comes to leveraging AI at this time.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the tools, ikaun being one of them, has the option of having your own dedicated private environment for access to these large language models. So that's really where the market is going, where your data is safe. And then, within an ikaun, you can actually upload your past pitches and proposals and have conversations with those documents. So these generative tools and techniques are ever increasingly becoming more secure and more reliable for you to actually leverage your specific information. Okay, so let's talk about, based on the research, what contributes to win rate. And so we asked a couple questions. And so what really what came to light was that the strength of your existing client relationship is very, very important. An incumbent always has an advantage. We actually talked to some folks, inside counsel folks that review RFPs, are part of the purchasing process. And, the majority of the time they really are looking at their existing relationships with their existing outside counsel and seeing if that outside counsel has the capabilities to represent them in potentially this new piece of work. Where there's an opportunity is obviously when that person or those people do not have that specific experience. This is really where one can come in and disrupt the incumbent. Also, understanding the client needs and requirements. So being able to clearly articulate back to your client what their needs are, having a clear understanding as to what their business is, has proven to be very, very important based on the survey. So again, just being able to articulate your clear understanding of what they're asking for, and being able to present representative work that aligns to that, as well as experts. And then the third, at least according to the survey, was that there was a belief that competitive pricing was very, very important. And so some of the conversations that we had with inside counsel folks, while it did say that price is important, oftentimes really what they're looking at is the likelihood of getting the outcome that they're going for. I guess larger kind of transactional based work or work where there's a lot of paper pushing and things like that. Obviously, the competitive pricing is super, super important. But again, based on the conversations that we had with some inside counsel folks, they were really looking at who is most likely to have the outcome that I'm going for. And so finally, again, what came to light here was that increased win rates is something that you're looking to get to. Obviously, we want to increase that 18% to something a little bit better. But also you, according to the survey, you were looking to spend less time doing that. And that's really where automation starts to come in. Obviously leveraging whether it's your experience management platform, your pitch and proposal solution, but also making sure that you have the processes in place at the firm to ensure that you always have this consistently evolving set of experience that you can pull from. So it's one thing to have kind of a, an experience management platform that, when you launch it has all the latest, greatest information, but really those platforms do take some care and feeding, and making sure that you have a process in place to ensure that that's happening is really, really important. And so that's, again, just to summarize some of the key findings of the report itself. You can download that and read the entire report. In addition to this, because the overwhelming response was that increased win rates is really what you all are looking for, we're actually going to have a follow-up piece of research where we talk more to inside counsel folks to figure out from their perspective how you all can increase your win rate. So that's a piece of research that we're going to get started here pretty quickly. But with that, I wanted to, again, reintroduce the panel and start to get some answers, some insights from them. The first is, again, getting back to that incumbent advantage. And so really what I wanted to talk to the panel about is what are some proactive tactics and even provocative tactics for disrupting that incumbent. Based on, again, some of those conversations that we had with inside counsel, it became clear that those existing relationships are very, very important. But having said that, there are tactics that you can use to differentiate and at minimum make the decision much, much harder. And so I wanted to go ahead and ask Rachel, what are some of the strategies that you've seen for challenging an incumbent?
Well, I think a big part of challenging an incumbent is understanding your relationships. And of course, when I say that, we're thinking, okay, who are our alumni that have gone to that client? How else might we know them using like board relationships and different relationship resources to look at that? But I think some of the newer things out there that may help really disrupt things, take a look at your lateral. So first, take a look at the client, see who's been representing them, and then see who's recently lateral from into your organization from those other organizations. Another is look at their litigation history, look at the judges that they've been against, and see if your rate is better. If you've performed better in front of this judge, and there's a lot of different litigation analytic products out there, talk to your library or knowledge management function. I'm sure you subscribe to one of them. And look at, how you've performed in front of judges that they've been in front of or areas that they have actively litigated. And how are you winning? How are you doing that? Same thing when it comes to deals. Who are the incumbents on their deals and how do you stack up against them, whether it be in rankings or awards or, issues where you've negotiated better deals for your clients than perhaps they've had done in the past. So really taking a look at that relationship and kind of peeling back a layer of the information available to you.
And so in terms of some of the tools and technologies that you're using to do that research, I mean, what I'm hearing is that have an understanding of the laterals, have an understanding of alumni, have understanding of past work, but what are some of the tools that you all are using to do that type of research?
So when it comes to judge analytics, oftentimes we'll go leverage Docket Alarm to see the different times, say the client is Bank USA. So we'll look up Bank USA, see who, what have they been litigating and who they've been litigating in front of, and then taking a look at how do we perform on those topics and those judges. And, that could be a really compelling talking point when you're trying to disrupt an incumbent. Also taking a look at, if Bob Smith recently lateraled from law firm ABC and law firm ABC is also representing Bank USA, what inside scoop that can he give you that might not be in a publicly available resource? Like what's the intel that, is only kept in the human brain?
Right. Yeah, and that's important is that, a lot of these data sources obviously have great information, but a lot of the times it's just what an individual might know and kind of, the firm's information about that particular client. Now, I know, Murray, one of the things that we had talked about was, really elevating, because one of the services that you all provide is around, creating amazing pitches and, beautiful pitches, beautiful proposals. So what are some of your thoughts as it relates to how you can elevate your presence or disrupt an incumbent just based on the presentation itself?
Yeah, well, I think obviously beating the incumbent is always challenging, but I think aligning the visual content, given the opportunity, in some cases, there are some formalities of a RFP response, but whether you're in a second stage evaluation or whether or not even in that first stage you want to add a piece of visual content that will help differentiate you, I think aligning to the particular matter. You want to have imagery that is focused on the particular expertise that you have. You wouldn't want to have a whole view of cars if you were pitching a piece for a mining piece of business, right? You'd want to have alignment on the visual content. I also think the idea of looking and maintaining your brand, which is always really important, and CMOs and others protect that brand because it's part of who you are, and that's a really important thing. But there are a number of things we do in what we call brand adaptive design. So in some cases, we're staying within brand, but we're trying to, in a sense, shock the system a little bit with a unique view, a particular way to highlight individuals. If that's your strength, find the strength in the message that you think will help set you apart, and then apply visual content and unique visual ways to represent that. If it's an individual that's just come over, who has an experience in that space, who's won a bunch of different cases, then you want to highlight that particular individual and the depth of that experience at the firm. If it happens to be location centric, language centric, other kind of factors, those all come into play. And you want to make sure that visually you're representing those areas of expertise. And in some cases, you have to be a little bit bolder when you're trying to unseat somebody, and content can help you send that message.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so kind of the next topic that I wanted to talk about is that, a loss is not always a loss. Just because you submit a particular RFP or proposal and maybe you don't get that specific piece of work. One of the things that came out again with our conversations with inside counsel is that how you show and the quality of your response, some of the things that you can do is, again, while you might not get that specific piece of work, it really does dramatically impact the client's perspective of the overall firm, the quality of each one of your responses. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask the panel here was, what are some strategies for standing out? I mean, one of the things that I used to do when pitching more technology services is I would always give what I called a gift. I would, within the context of the proposal, I would actually help them to actually get their project started, like some piece of information, whether it's research, whether it's a design comp, some interesting piece of information that actually is insightful to them. So again, I want to get back to the panel and just ask, like, what are some of the strategies for standing out and always showing well within all of your responses?
Well, I think obviously that the visual part is important, that we care about. I think the research on the organization that you're pitching and the alignment to that, in many cases, there are similar views, all kinds of different fronts about how that organization thinks, what's important to them, why they're in the business they're in. And I think it's important to talk about why you believe that, if it's oil and gas is the area of focus, if you're focused on a pitch for an oil and gas piece of business, why you believe that you stand out in that space, obviously depth of experience, other kind of things, but why you're in that business, why you've chosen that particular area to be experts is really important. And in some cases, your firm may have a variety of different skill sets in a variety of areas of expertise, but again, they're evaluating your particular pitch most likely on a particular case or on a particular matter that's really focused. And so the evaluation is not just about the fact that you have a broad breadth of capabilities, but it's about a particular area. So representing that well, showing that visually, being smart about how you focus particularly into their story. Again, they're reading you to evaluate you as being part of their team, essentially. And so would they hire you as being part of their team? And the firm itself is trying to showcase itself, whether it be visual content, how pieces lay out, how you're aligning their particular focus as a company to how you focus as a company, and showing that there's a synergy there.
Yeah, and Rachel or Jason, did you all have any thoughts on that one?
Murray, I kind of wanted to put you on the spot a little bit. Are you in the work and the clients you're working with, are you seeing any trends right now from visual identity, like particular format or I talked to a couple of clients last year that were looking at doing online, like HTML driven proposals. Like, what are you seeing coming into 2024?
Yeah, we see a couple different things. Thanks for the question, Jason. That one of them is driven by a very customized, very personalized. In some cases, that means a microsite where somebody might be invited to go to that microsite and deliver a presentation that's just for them from a web-based standpoint. The other is the use of video and the use of moving graphics. So if you're showing a chart, it's one thing to have it animated to roll through it, but if you embed some particular content in there, you can see various things happening at the same time that are driving a particular view. You're always amazed at what impresses and sends a strong feeling about how well a company looks. Some of it is the content, of course, but some of it also is how the visual is being represented and how well aligned you are to that. So microsites, we're also seeing some pitch rooms, if you will, that are they look like a data room, but they're particular pitch rooms where you can add not only pieces of content that look at the actual pitch, but you could put your RFP, you could put a number of other things inside there. Those are a little bit more customized. The final piece we're seeing is that one of our partners that we work with a lot called Turtle, they actually will not only look at opens, but they'll look at time spent on pages. So you'd be able to get some analytics that will tell you exactly how long someone spent on a particular page, where they spent their time, what that looks like. And those are great for future pitches to be able to say, no one spent any time on this particular page. We thought it was awesome, but nobody ever looked at it or stayed there. They just breezed right through. So those kind of analytics inside of documents is becoming more and more popular.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that those are extremely powerful takeaways because it's not just whether it's a printed version or a PDF or what have you. It's an interactive environment where you can actually engage with more pieces of content than just the standard proposal. So super, super powerful.
Yeah. And, to kind of bring it back to relationships, I'd also recommend following up. Just because you didn't get the business doesn't mean the relationship ends. So focus on building that relationship and understanding and follow up, see how that piece of work went. If they went to someone else, did it go well? Couldn't have gone better? And keeping up with that relationship, we always have to remember that, when we meet people in jobs, that's just a moment in time, but they bounce around just as much as we bounce around. So by keeping that relationship fresh and staying front of mind, you could have an opportunity when that general counsel moves on to their next organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rachel, if I could just add to that, there's one thing that I think is interesting. I'm always surprised when we've been in the situation where we haven't won a piece of business. I say to the person, while I would have liked to have been the choice, I hope you're wildly successful with whoever you work with. And sometimes people are shocked that you would wish them well in the face of a loss. And that has changed the dialogue to allow them to open up to me or others in our organization much more quickly, because their best interest is primary to you, even though they're telling you that they didn't give you the work. But if you can flip that, then all of a sudden, like, wow, you do have my best interest in mind. And it just changes the dialogue about what they share. And then it changes the next conversation you have when there's another piece of business.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually that kind of brings us into, this kind of next concept of planting seeds of influence, and what are some of the things that the lasting impressions that you can leave even in defeat. And I think, Murray, you brought one up that obviously voicing that your interest is in them being successful is very, very important. But also I think, Jason, you had some thoughts as it relates to, just following up, and seeing, doing some additional, whether it's fact finding or other areas that you can leave an impact.
Well, I think there's two things I could talk about quickly. One's kind of external facing, one's internal facing. Externally, I learned this years and years ago when I was selling computers in college, and this was in the Stone Age. So this is when computers still cost north of $2,000. So people would come in like they were shopping for cars. They never made a purchase their first visit, right? So something that I learned to do, or my boss taught me to do, was, hey, leave them with something of value. And when you're talking about selling computers, that value is knowledge. I'm not going to send them home with a keyboard or a mouse or something, but I made sure that they knew, hey, you're looking for this kind of computer. Make sure you're thinking about these things, whether you buy with me in the store, buy it online, whatever. I think that is something that, and Murray's touched on it a little bit already. They're showing intrinsic value in that you actually care what the outcome is ultimately for this company, this person, regardless if you're involved in that project or initiative. So just having something that, and attorneys and law firms at large, they generate an enormous amount of marketable content. So it's not hard to even grab something that it already exists, might have already been published, might have already been publicized, say, hey, sorry, we weren't able to move forward on this project together, but here's something that you need to be thinking about regardless of who you go with or how you approach it. That's that it costs almost nothing to put something like that into place. And it shows, to Murray's point, shows the client that you care about what the direction that they're going in and the ultimate outcome. That's the external bit. The internal bit is more for, from a data nerd perspective. And Rachel and Murray, I think both have touched on this a little bit just a moment ago, but understanding the loss and not just saying we didn't win it, on to the next thing, but taking a moment to say, do we understand why we lost? Do we know, did we collect all the appropriate information about this particular opportunity or company or contact as part of the sales process? Because you may not be able to look at that individual loss and say, okay, here's exactly what I need to do better next time. But as a collection, as an aggregate of data around the opportunities you didn't necessarily win, you can start looking for patterns and understand, like, okay, in this particular region, we underperform. When we put forward these particular, partners, then we've got this particular outcome. If we lead with these type of representative matters, this is what happens. You start to see patterns emerge. And that could even go forward to what Murray was talking about, just from a pure design perspective and understanding what you're actually pitching to the client, speaking the client's language, showing the client that they have somebody that knows what they're talking about. These are all factors that you can measure at the aggregate to understand, okay, here's what's working and what's not. And that makes you as a marketer much more valuable back to your partners to say, look, we've tried this kind of approach in the past. Typically, it leads to a larger win rate or a larger loss rate or non-response, whatever it is that you're measuring. And that helps you be more informed when recommending back to the partners you support how to be more strategic with their presentations.
Yeah, to co-sign on what Jason's saying, we talked a little bit earlier that a lot of an RFP is project management and defining roles and responsibilities. And, defining what are those points that we follow up after the fact. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in this presentation, but I can't emphatically, enthusiastically co-sign about the follow-up. And putting it in a way that you can, in a structured way in which you can analyze it and identify patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can tell you, I've worked with plenty of firms, plenty of clients where they'll have, that conversation. I'm sure all of us have had at some point where you have to say to a partner, maybe even reluctantly, we can't really do that. And you may know in your head, or maybe you think in your head, just anecdotally, yeah, clients don't love when a single bio goes past 2 pages. that doesn't make a lot of sense. But if a very high power partner says everybody else gets a quarter page, mine gets to be as many pages as needs to be. That's real stuff that happens. I've seen it and lived it myself. So being able to back that up and say, I hear you, but it looks like based on what the data tells us that maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe we want to reconsider. You're not going to win all those battles, but you're going to have a much stronger position to get, again, the partners where they need to be, even if sometimes it's reluctantly. I'll leave it at that.
Anything else anybody wants to bring up on this?
A loss is not the end. I think if we could summarize it in just one sentence.
Yeah. Yep. A loss is not always a loss. So again, going back to a few conversations that I'd had with inside counsel folks, one in particular was a pretty sizable biotech firm. And one of the things that came back pretty strong was that, what GCs they really don't want you to ask what their problems are. They really want you to come informed. They want you to understand their business. They want you to understand their values, the challenges that they have. And so what they're looking more for is tell them what they should be concerned with. And so these are all things that you can start to craft into your responses. I heard that it was really important to be curious about the products and services that the client actually has. So it's not just about the piece of work that they're presenting to you, but also understanding the client, doing research on their mission, vision, values if they have those. Just basically doing your homework. Another strategy that came out that was pretty interesting was this concept of telling war stories, like where you've done this, but much more in a narrative format, as opposed to just being a bullet that says, hey, we represented X in Y. Really telling the story of that particular matter has been shown to be really effective, at least for this particular client. And again, we talked about it a little bit earlier, that cost is not always the determining factor. That oftentimes, they're selecting based on the likelihood of the outcome that they're receiving. So it really is, based on value and how much they trust that you will meet that specific outcome. Now, there are some things in high volume work related to like insurance claims processing, those types of things where it's just a bunch of, very, very small type matters or transactions. Obviously, being cost effective is very, very important there. But in terms of for the panel, what are some best practices in demonstrating your understanding of the business and coming prepared?
Well, I'll just mention on the war story side of things, that's a really challenging piece to visually represent, right? Because you want to write kind of the story of what happened, right? Sometimes that's a chapter, sometimes that's like you said, bullet points. There's a place in between. We found that visually the ability to demonstrate, whether it be a timeline across a page, and talk about necessarily the things that on, say, above the line would be how it impacted the client, and below the line, the actions taken by the firm or that's pitching, right? So you kind of are showing the benefits across a line, but it's the visual part of that is always tricky, but can be really compelling, because in a very interesting snapshot, you could spend a fair amount of time, if you're in a presentation, talking about how that affected both sides. When this happened, we did this. Yeah. This was there an influence in this regard or that. It shows the ability to react to situations. It shows the ability to keep a client's best interest in mind. And it's a delicate thing to do, but can be done really meaningfully, especially on the war stories. It visually usually ends up being the storyline. It's also really important to align the storytelling to the person that might be in the presentation or might be in the response that's giving it. So some lawyers will and partners will want to tell a story a certain way, some will not. And there's not only the visual part, but there's also the coaching for them to be able to be comfortable so that they're telling not someone else's story, but they're telling their own story in a compelling manner. But the visual aids can help a lot there.
Yeah, it's kind of like a life cycle, like what happened. This was the first thing, this was the response. and kind of telling that timeline, if you will, of kind of the flow of the particular matter.
Yeah.
So I think, Rachel, you wanted to talk a little bit about industry specific work.
Yeah. When you're thinking about your knowledge, looking at it from an internal and external perspective. Internally, take a look at the work that you've done for similar organizations, similar issues that they identify in the RFP or through previous conversations have been identified, and take a look at that aggregate data and see if there's trends or stories to tell. And really be able to articulate, not only do you understand this individual client, but you understand the themes that are going on within the industry itself. And looking at your prior work experience can help you tell that. Also looking at, recent lateral acquisitions. Is your firm, heavily investing in, the Middle East or into a particular jurisdiction or industry topic? And take a look and extract those stories. Don't assume that your lawyers are always prepared to tell those stories. It's your job to look and kind of give that, that pithy one sentence summary of all the different things going on in your firm that help show the internal knowledge that you have about this area. And I think Jason was going to talk a little bit about the external information that we, it's our role as legal marketers to help facilitate that knowledge sharing.
Well, if you've ever been on one of those sales calls, like SaaS companies are can sometimes be like the ones that come in from outside of legal are kind of the worst offenders, but they get on a sales call with you and they're like, yeah, so do you guys do a lot of ads on like the sides of buses and billboards and stuff? And you're immediately like, this person does not understand at all what we do as a business. We've all been on a call kind of like that. Why would you send out your partners to do kind of like a half researched kind of approach, high leverage, high dollar kind of pitch to these kind of companies when you've got all of this data, like, all the internal data that Rachel talked about, but then also all the marketing and business development, client service data that you have sitting there that tells you so much about individual people, particular companies, regions, industries. You have all of this amazing data already at your fingertips. And there's a lot more data out there, whether it's industry feeds or court-related data. Rachel touched on some of that earlier. Combining all of that to put together an actual dossier about a particular target and the key people within that target to understand, okay, here's everything or as close to everything that we have that we know about these people going in, so that we know, again, going back to tracking losses, we know what kind of presentations we've done in the past that have fallen flat. We know what the kind of the related variables are there that we need to avoid, or here's all the relationship data we have. So we need to make sure we schedule some internal meetings with these other folks that know these people really well and understand the right way to approach them. Here's a lot of information, even going out externally to the client themselves. Here's kind of their brand identity, how they present themselves. To Murray's point, where can we align with that in our own pitch materials? So getting as much understanding of your targets as possible before you go into a particular opportunity, that's going to raise the chances for a positive outcome substantially. Now, I'm talking about it like you can just each and every time you have an RFP, great. Let's triage and go digging for treasure. That's not how this needs to work in the long term. If you've got the appropriate systems in place, experience, proposals being some of those, internally developed KM systems, the website, your marketing stuff, your financial systems. If you're keeping up with that data in a consistent and a sound manner, then it's a matter of just segmenting out based on whatever your particular need is at the time, so that you don't have to go digging through that stuff, running all sorts of reports, combining a bunch of spreadsheets, all the normal stuff that you have to do when it's a fire drill, but instead say, I'm looking for information on this particular person or company or region or industry. And from there, cutting up the data in a way that's a lot more digestible, a lot faster than you would normally do when you're scrambling for this stuff. So that's my long treatise on, you've got all this data. the smart firms are now working towards, or they're already there. I know Rachel and her team are already in the thick of this stuff, trying to figure out how do we pull all this data together so that we spend our time segmenting out based on a business case rather than scrambling and digging and exporting.
Yeah, one of the things that came out in these conversations, and it was, I forgot how exactly she'd phrased it, but it was basically that a lot of the times these responses are all talking about the firm, right? What the firm is. And the quicker that you can get to, or strategies to actually start talking about the client and actually communicating back to them that you understand them and that it becomes more about them, especially during the presentation itself. The more you can talk about the client, their needs, and how your firm aligns to that. It was really an interesting conversation that I had where what she was saying was that, again, those that actually brought it back to them and making sure that they're communicating their understanding of the client, those are the ones that really stuck out or stand out in the presentation aspect. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to talking more about the knowledge that your firm has. Again, looking at some of those tools that you're using, even if it's Excel or emails. What I really wanted to talk about, and we have one more question after this. This is kind of one of the last questions. I really wanted to talk about strategies for leveraging the knowledge of business development. I also wanted to talk about, there are many different thoughts on how specific do we get when we're profiling matters. Again, part of the experience management process is that when a matter eclipses whether it's a certain number of hours or something, it becomes interesting to marketing and business development. Usually you go into a state of profiling that matter so that it's available to you when you actually need to respond to an RFP or create a pitch. And so there are different philosophies as it relates to what information should be collected. Should we collect some very specific information about antitrust or corporate M&A or corporate funds? Should we have very specific pieces of information that we profile on, or should we be more generic? And so I think I wanted to, again, just pass it back to the panel to talk about insights on managing your data, what data is most relevant and really needed when you're doing a pitch and a proposal as it relates to representative work.
Well, I guess I can't help myself. This is literally where I live. So I will start with my philosophy here. I think the best practice in getting information is that it's a team sport. I firmly believe that our lawyers should be providing us with that information in a structured format. And you have to walk a fine line between having, a general amount of information. Personally, if I can only have a couple things, I want to know how I can talk about the matter, where is the matter located, what's the client's role, and what's the industry of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
If I only have those things, they can really help me narrow down for a pitch. And then depending on different
And then, sorry, Rachel, when you say what you can talk about, are you talking about specific transaction size, client name?
Client name, do you need to have the billing or handling lawyer sign off on it? There's a lot of clients where you can anonymize the client, but you can talk about the deal value, or you can talk about the client, but not the actual work. And so those nuances and it varies from matter to matter. Just because a litigation is public, the client might not want you to ever talk about it.
Right.
And so how do you capture that information in a way so those are things that are really important to me, thinking back in my marketing days.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the perspective of being in knowledge management, I really want that information in structured fields so I can easily shuttle that information to a variety of different sources, and then using full text search capabilities to look for more of those nuances. So, the special idiosyncrasies that I might not have created fields for, because if you have too many fields and you go too granular, you're not going to get a whole lot. And if you get a whole lot, it's probably not incredibly consistent.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in what are the critical things that you need versus oh my gosh, I want to track everything that's possible. I think you track the stuff that's important to you, and you find out what, and when I say you, I'm kind of speaking to the firm you.
Mhm.
And you find that out through, getting executive support for these processes, understanding the business strategy of your firm. What are the areas that are really important and really profitable to you? And those are the areas where it's worth kind of digging down versus, if you try to go for everything, you're the master of nothing. There's a much more cute colloquial phrase that is skipping right out my brain right now, but it's kind of like master of nothing. But I know Jason has some thoughts on also how to share and kind of best practices when it comes to profiling.
Well, I mean, it might be worth taking a quick detour to continue that point and talking about even configuring an experience system for the first time. Have been a part of those projects and people thinking, okay, I need to capture 100 different data points for every single company record or matter record in a system. And they spend all the time workshopping that, meetings, approvals, disapprovals, more meetings, more approvals. And then once you got finally got your 100 fields created, you get it out in the real world and you only use 10 of them. Don't fall into that trap.
No.
Once you have all this up and going, from a profiling standpoint, I have a kind of a weird hot take, if you want to call it that, on profiling matters, particularly the narratives that you're writing, is use your SEO hat. Like I'm a digital marketer by trade. That's what I've done for years and years. And so SEO has just been part of what I do for a long time. And a lot of these systems, even if you're just using Excel spreadsheets tucked away in your DMS or SharePoint somewhere, they all run off search, right? Like you end up going to the search and saying keyword, 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 give me what I want. Thinking about the content that you're writing within these matters, thinking with an SEO mindset, what are the keywords that are going to be used for people looking for partners, for me, for my team, for the pursuits team, looking for this information later? How can I make that as streamlined as possible? Writing clearly, and that's the basis of SEO discipline, is writing clear, concise content that applies to a particular situation. So if you're following those kind of tenets, that's going to benefit you over the long run. Again, talking about tracking losses earlier, right? For one particular instance, it may not seem pretty useful, but on the aggregate and over a period of time, that becomes a much more robust and intuitive system for you and the rest of your team to use.
So Jason, I have a question for you related to that. Do you think that in a large pitch, firms making, pitches all the time, but a particularly large pitch, you should align, speaking of SEO, should you align your LinkedIn and other digital marketing to a particular industry that you might be pitching? So if, again, I used the oil and gas before, not to say that that's the business line, but if you're talking about an oil and gas matter, and you're pitching a large matter, do you think you turn in the RFP and over the next course of the few weeks of evaluation time, you're posting more content that's aligned to that particular expertise?
Murray, that's what I would do. Like if it's, I think that's from a go-to-market standpoint, I think that's really great practice. I used to, in a past life, would run resume workshops, and my colleague was a lifelong HR pro, and she used to like to say, like, hey, it's okay to tweak your resume to fit the particular job that you're applying for, because you might have to, for one position, you might have to play up your tech credentials, and another one, it might have to be your people management credentials. Because ultimately you're selling yourself, right? This is a similar idea from a partner perspective. You're selling yourself and the expertise that you offer. So being able to say, I've got a huge RFP out around oil and gas right now. I know, or I'm going to expect somebody over there in the decision-making tree is going to dig around a little bit. And so if they hit the LinkedIn, I want them to see that, hey, I'm talking about this stuff. I'm developing thought leadership around this stuff, or I'm plugged into other important sources in this industry, and I'm resharing out from that's again, a relatively, very small lift in return for some potential huge gains. So yeah, if I was in that seat, Murray, I would absolutely be doing that.
Yeah, and oftentimes, it kind of gets into that concept of attorneys having multiple biographies, right? Whether it's based on work, industry, what have you. They have different Rep Matters for that particular resume. They have different publications. You know, a lot of the times you can repost the publications that have already been created based on the attorney. So usually there is a publication section that each of your attorneys will have. So, you know, if it was, again, back to Murray's concept of oil and gas, a lot of the times the content is already created. It's just about getting it out there again and out into in this world and into LinkedIn.
And I just want to give a quick shout out to Laura Beth Allen. Thank you, my friend. I was looking for the phrase jack of all trades, master of none. And just because I just can't yes and Jason's point enough of starting at a high level when it comes to data collection, because it's always easier to create more granularity. It's really hard to collapse granularity into a larger concept. So although it's tempting, you know, keep like, instead of creating that granularity, take the time to talk about what Murray and Jason were just talking about and reposting evergreen content, providing content to your lawyers that they can repost on LinkedIn. You know, you only have so much time in the day, so where are you putting your energy?
Okay, so we're right at about time, but the last thing that I wanted to ask the panel was, okay, so you've spent all this, whatever, at least 46 hours crafting your RFP or your pitch. You know, you hit send and you kind of cross your fingers hoping that you get the deal. But what are some strategies after you do your submission? What are some of the things that we should be doing after we actually have completed and submitted our RFP or pitch?
Mine's a quick one. Redline your first draft to your final product and see what changes you've made and what updates do you need to make to your existing content. As well as, you know, if lawyers are taking the time to create bespoke bios for different industries or things like that, make sure to extract them to help so that they're available for future use.
Yeah, so it's kind of a knowledge harvesting process, right? So you take what your standard proposal may have been, you kind of look at how it was refactored, rewritten, and then you reincorporate that back into wherever it is that you're storing that so that it's available for you in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Murray, I know you, one of the things that you had talked about, and we briefly mentioned it, was, you know, obviously following up with some very important LinkedIn posts and kind of making your presence known. But also there was something that you had brought up about kind of elevating to text just as a strategy for building client relationships.
Yeah, I think that one, obviously the content parts of things and adjusting your content to be more specialized is part of the world, right? Our phones do that for us. We need to do that in terms of how we communicate to our clients and prospects. The only other part I was just going to say, and it's more of a selling technique, is just the sooner you can get your client relationship, and maybe that happens in an RFP initially, maybe that happens during the course of your development along the way, if you win the business or don't, the sooner you can get the relationship to a texting kind of relationship. If you look at some statistics that talk about performance and responsiveness to cold outreaches on email, you know, broadly, follow up on email, other kind of things. As soon as you get to the point where you're able to text with your particular client, it changes the relationship significantly and the responsiveness increases a lot. That's not to say that you should start texting RFP responses to somebody that you don't have a strong relationship with, but I think it's a good measure to be able to think about, do I have that kind of relationship? What do I need to do to build that kind of relationship where I can be communicating in a manner that's much more personal and direct? I think that's more of just a little kind of business development strategy overall. And the responsiveness that the statistics bear out that they're not only you're getting responded to, but there's someone willing to do that is typically willing to trust you with a relationship in some form.
Well, good. So I appreciate everybody's time, the panel's time. I appreciate everybody taking some time to join the webinar. We hope it was useful. We hope you came away with at least just a couple ideas on how to improve your existing processes. If you're interested in learning more about automating kind of those mundane RFP tasks and processes, you can go ahead and use this QR code and do a little bit more research on the tools and technologies that are available to you. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the webinar and say thank you to Jason, Rachel, and Murray for your insights. I appreciate all your time, and we will talk soon.